I had just backed my jet ski down my driveway after a long weekend on the lake when I saw her Tamra Klein, the HOA vice president and neighborhood tyrant power, walking toward my property like she was chasing down a shoplifter. I sighed, pulled off my sunglasses, and braced myself. "You can't leave that thing in your driveway, Wyatt," she barked, pointing at my jet ski like it had personally offended her. Lake Rule 7, no personal watercraft stored in view from the street for more than 24 hours. I leaned against the side of the trailer. "It's only been here for 10 minutes, Tamra. I just got back." She crossed her arms, lips pursed like she'd sucked a lemon. "Doesn't matter. I already took a photo and submitted a citation. You'll be fined $200 unless it's moved by this evening." I chuckled. "You do realize I own this house, right? Not you. And that rule you keep quoting isn't even in the official HOA bylaws." Her nostrils flared. "Oh, we updated them last month. Didn't you read the email?" I was working a double shift at the firehouse. "I didn't have time to read your novella about flagpole heights and hedge trimming." Her eyes narrowed. "I'm calling the tow company. If you don't move it in the next hour, it's gone." "You're not above the rules, Wyatt Parker." I watched her stomp back down the street, heels clicking like a metronome of rage. I wasn't worried. Tamra had threatened to tow my truck last fall when I parked 2 inches over the curb. Nothing ever came of it. She liked to bark louder than she bit. But this time, I underestimated how far she'd go. Around 45 minutes later, I was inside rinsing off when I heard the unmistakable sound of chains clanking and a diesel engine pulling up. I grabbed a towel, jogged outside barefoot, and saw a tow truck backing into my driveway. The driver hopped out and began unhooking straps. "You touching that ski, and we're gonna have a problem," I said, stepping between him and the trailer. He held up his hands. "I got a signed order from the Willow Creek HOA vice president. Says this is a repeated violation." "Nope. That's private property, and unless you've got a court order or a sheriff with you, you're not moving a damn thing." Right on cue, Tamra came strutting around the corner holding a clipboard. "He does have authorization," she chirped. "I'm acting within HOA enforcement authority." I walked past her and pulled out my phone. "Then you won't mind if I get the sheriff down here to confirm that?" She blanched. "That won't be necessary, but I was already calling, and I wasn't bluffing either." My cousin, Sheriff Lance Harlan, had been waiting for an excuse to deal with Tamra's nonsense. He'd received over 16 complaints from other residents this year alone. He told me to hang tight. Tamra stood frozen on the sidewalk, eyes darting between me, the tow truck, and my phone. "You're escalating this unnecessarily," she said tightly. "No, Tamra," I said. "You did that when you tried to tow private property without legal grounds." 10 minutes later, a county sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Lance stepped out, sunglasses on, that slow, deliberate walk of his making it clear he wasn't here for a friendly chat. "Someone want to explain why there's a tow truck on private property without the owner's consent?" he asked, voice low but firm. Tamra's mouth opened, but nothing came out. She looked like someone had unplugged her. The tow truck guy started stammering about just following orders. Lance turned to me. "You want them gone?" "Yup." "Then we're done here," he said, waving the driver off. "If this vehicle moves so much as an inch, I'll charge you with trespassing." Tamra finally found her voice. "But he's violating. You're not law enforcement," Lance snapped. "And unless your HOA charter was approved by a judge in the last hour, this is unlawful towing." "You want to push it? I'll be happy to file charges." The tow truck peeled out without another word. Tamra stood there, clipboard clutched to her chest like a life vest. "Next time you try this," Lance said, stepping closer to her, "you better bring a lawyer, not a clipboard." 2 days after Tamra's failed tow attempt, I came home to find a thick envelope duct taped to my front door, not slipped in the mailbox, not slid under the mat. Duct taped, like she wanted to make sure it left residue behind. Inside was a formal notice on Willow Creek HOA letterhead, complete with a gold embossed seal at the top, because of course it was. According to the notice, I was being fined $500 for obstruction of HOA enforcement, plus an additional $100 for unauthorized use of residential property for recreational vehicle storage. And at the bottom, in bold red font, failure to comply within 72 hours will result in legal escalation. I stood there on the porch, flipping through the pages, each more absurd than the last. At the end was a demand for me to appear before the HOA Compliance Committee, a group I'd never heard of at a meeting that night. No location, just clubhouse annex room. We didn't have an annex room. Tossing the packet onto my workbench, I pulled out my laptop and started digging. I hadn't paid much attention to HOA politics before, but now I had a reason to. I found the most recent public filing from the HOA's annual report. The Compliance Committee wasn't listed. There were no meeting minutes mentioning its creation. No vote, no record, nothing. It didn't legally exist. That's when I knew this wasn't just about my jet ski. This was Tamra testing how far she could go. I changed into a clean shirt, grabbed a voice recorder, and headed to the so-called meeting. The clubhouse was dark except for a flicker of fluorescent light leaking from a side room. I pushed open the half-closed door and walked into what looked like a converted storage space. A folding table sat up front. Behind it, Tamra and two other HOA board members I vaguely recognized from block parties. They were seated like a tribunal, papers spread before them. Tamra adjusted her reading glasses and cleared her throat. "Mr. Parker, we've convened this special session to address your repeated violations." I sat down without being asked. According to HOA bylaws, any disciplinary hearing must be announced at least 5 days in advance to all involved parties and be held in a designated common use area. This room fails both requirements. One of the men, a wiry guy with a Bluetooth earpiece stuck in his head like a growth, shifted uncomfortably. "We had to act quickly. You've been obstructing community standards." I pressed the voice recorder on the table. "For the record, I'm documenting this entire session. Under California Civil Code 4925, HOAs cannot conduct disciplinary hearings outside of public visibility unless involving privileged legal matters. This is neither." Tamra's eyes flicked to the recorder, then back to me. "You're twisting things." "The board voted to form a subcommittee, which show me the vote," I interrupted. "The notice, the minutes, the charter. I've already reviewed the last 6 months of filings." "The Compliance Committee doesn't legally exist." The other woman on the panel, someone I now recognized as the treasurer, leaned in. "Tamra, maybe we should consult with Tamra," waved her off. "This is a closed issue. His behavior is disruptive to the harmony of the neighborhood." I stood up. "You can't fabricate rules, fine people without process, and then invent a committee to enforce them." Tamra stood too. "You're dismissed, Mr. Parker. Refusal to abide will result in lien proceedings." "Good," I said. "Go ahead and file one. I'll see you in court." The room went still. Not a sound except the low hum from the vending machine in the hallway. I left the recorder running and walked out. Back home, I called a real estate attorney I'd done a fire inspection for a few months back. She owed me a favor. I sent her copies of every document Tamra had shoved my way, including the bogus fines. Within an hour, she called me back laughing. "They're in violation of so many state statutes, I could write a textbook. And if they actually try to file that lien, they're opening themselves up to a lawsuit." I asked her to draft a cease and desist letter citing every violation in plain language. We sent it certified the next morning, addressed to each board member individually. No more hiding behind a collective name. By the weekend, I started hearing from neighbors. First, a retired Navy machinist named Phil, who lived across the street and had gotten fined last year for having his flagpole too high. Then a young couple, Jamie and Lewis, who said Tamra made them take down a swing set because it wasn't in harmony with the architectural integrity of the neighborhood. They'd never fought it, just assumed she had the power. I invited them over and showed them the paperwork, the cease and desist, the fake committee, the missing votes. Their faces lit up like someone had opened a window in a smoke-filled room. We decided to form a coalition not to start a war but to expose everything. I named it the Willow Creek Homeowner Rights Group and printed flyers. By Tuesday, we had 21 people signed up. That was enough to demand a special election under the HOA's own bylaws. That same evening, a neighbor named Carla dropped off a USB drive. She worked as a freelance IT consultant and had done some tech support for the HOA office months earlier. She'd backed up their cloud data when they couldn't figure out how to log in. "I probably shouldn't have kept it," she said, "but something told me you'd need this one day." I plugged it into my laptop and opened the files, emails, dozens of them. Tamra had been coordinating with a private towing company for months, targeting specific residents she labeled as repeat offenders. She'd even offered them incentives, gift cards, administrative fees, and in one email, tickets to a winery event in exchange for quick removals. But that wasn't the worst of it. There were letters she drafted to mortgage lenders, falsely claiming that certain homes were out of compliance and should be considered high risk. Those letters had never been sent, but they were dated, signed, and saved in a folder labeled Future Escalations. I handed everything to my attorney. She called the district attorney's office the same day. By Friday, detectives from the Economic Crimes Unit were knocking on Tamra's door. I watched from across the street as she opened it, wearing a bathrobe and a face mask, eyes wide. They went inside. An hour later, she was led out in cuffs. A cruiser pulled up and parked half on her pristine lawn. One of the officers stepped out, glanced around the neighborhood, and muttered, "Guess the HOA forgot to fine us for that." Nobody laughed louder than Phil. That night, we held our first official homeowner rights group meeting in the community park. Someone brought a folding podium. Someone else brought donuts. We didn't need a clubhouse or gold seals, just people who were tired of being pushed around. Tamra's arrest made the local news. The headline read, "HOA Vice President Charged in Scheme to Illegally Target Residents." Turned out she'd been operating without a valid board vote for over a year. The compliance committee, total fiction. The fines, unenforceable. The lien threats, fraudulent. At the next official board election, we filled every seat with members from our group. And the first motion we passed: no more towing anything without a judge's signature. Democracy didn't die in Willow Creek. It moved into the garage and installed a jet ski. 2 weeks after Tamra's arrest, Willow Creek had changed in a way I hadn't seen since moving in 9 years ago. People waved more. Lawns were a little less manicured but a lot more cheerful. The constant hum of fear of fines, of threats, of arbitrary rules was gone. But beneath the surface, something still wasn't sitting right. The news had covered Tamra's arrest in broad strokes: misuse of HOA power, fraud, unauthorized lien threats. But as I reviewed the files Carla gave me more carefully, I found something that hadn't been mentioned publicly. There were scanned copies of bank statements from a separate account labeled Community Improvement Fund. It wasn't listed in the HOA's official records. The transactions started small: printer ink, meeting snacks, paper. Then they ballooned into charges for luxury hotel stays, spa services, and several payments to a shell company called Mossridge Solutions. I flagged them and called the same attorney who'd helped me draft the cease and desist. She brought in a forensic accountant, someone she trusted from her days working with the state licensing board. Within a week, he called me from his office in Sacramento. "There's roughly $83,000 unaccounted for," he said. "And that shell company registered to a P.O. box in Temecula. No employees, no services, just a fake front." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the spreadsheet on my laptop. "So she was embezzling from the homeowners directly." "Not just her," he replied. "The signatures on those withdrawals include 2 other board members." I didn't recognize the names at first, but then I cross-checked them against the HOA's archived email chains. One was the treasurer from that ridiculous compliance committee meeting. The other was the Bluetooth guy who sat next to her. I didn't bother confronting anyone this time. I forwarded everything to the county district attorney's office and attached a statement. That night, I filed an official request to unseal the HOA's financial records under California's Davis-Sterling Act, which requires all HOA records be made accessible to homeowners upon request. 3 days later, a pair of unmarked vehicles showed up outside the old HOA office trailer near the clubhouse. 2 agents in plain clothes went inside and didn't come out for over an hour. When they finally did, they were carrying boxes. The treasurer was arrested that afternoon during a yoga class at the community center. The Bluetooth guy tried to claim he'd only signed what Tamra told him to. But the ledger didn't lie. He had personally authorized wire transfers to Mossridge Solutions on 5 separate occasions. Word traveled even faster this time. Nobody argued. Nobody defended them. People had started talking more during our homeowner rights group meetings, and it turned out a lot of neighbors had suspected something was off for years. There were stories about missing security deposit refunds for clubhouse rentals, unexplained fee increases, even a canceled 4th of July fireworks show that had supposedly been called off for safety, but now looked more like a budget cover-up. We held a town hall under the pavilion at Willow Creek Park. No board members showed up, of course, but over 80 residents did, some bringing lawn chairs, others sitting on picnic tables. I stood on the stone bench near the fountain and addressed everyone, a folder of freshly printed documents in my hand. "They stole from us," I said plainly. "Not just money. They stole our peace of mind. They made us afraid to plant flowers or hang wind chimes or park in our own driveways. And they did it while taking vacations on our dime." A woman I hadn't met before stood up, a retired schoolteacher named Marie. "What do we do next?" I handed her a copy of the restructured HOA reform plan I drafted with help from the attorney and 2 other residents who had backgrounds in municipal planning. "We dissolve the current board and rebuild from the ground up. Transparent elections, annual audits, and no more secret committees." The vote was unanimous. We submitted the plan to the county housing liaison, who agreed to oversee a temporary management period while we transitioned leadership. That gave us the legal standing to put a freeze on all HOA spending until the audit was complete. That same weekend, I got a knock on my door just after sundown. It was Sheriff Lance again, this time off duty, wearing jeans and a hoodie. He looked tired but satisfied. "We got a confession," he said. Tamra rolled on the others. She admitted the towing threats were part of a pressure tactic to keep residents quiet. I raised an eyebrow. "What'd she get in return?" "Reduced sentence. Probation, community service, and full restitution. They're seizing her house and assets to repay the stolen funds." I nodded slowly. "That's more than I expected." Lance shoved his hands in his pockets. She also admitted to forging signatures on multiple HOA documents, including that fake compliance committee charter. "We're talking felony forgery, wire fraud, and conspiracy." We stood there for a moment, the crickets filling the silence between us. "She ever say why she did it?" Lance shrugged. "Power, control. Said she liked being respected, told the DA she thought of the neighborhood as her realm, her words." I shook my head. "Unreal." He turned to go, then paused. "By the way, that jet ski of yours still parked out front," I grinned, "moved it to the garage." "But not because of any rule." "Good," he said, chuckling. "Would hate to see you force the sheriff's office to get involved again." The new election was held under strict oversight. We used a third-party ballot service and had an attorney present to certify results. I didn't want to run, but the group insisted. So I agreed on the condition that we rotate leadership every year. We enacted a sunset clause on fines. Any infraction not addressed within 30 days would be invalid. We restructured the budget, cutting unnecessary services and redirecting funds toward community improvements chosen through resident voting. We also installed a public bulletin board near the mailboxes, where meeting minutes, budgets, and proposals were posted weekly. People started contributing again, not just money, but creativity. Someone painted a mural on the side of the clubhouse. Kids organized a bike parade. One guy even built a little free library that looked like a miniature lighthouse, and not once ever again did anyone get fined for owning a jet ski. The biggest surprise came a month later, when a letter arrived postmarked from a federal return address. The Office of the Inspector General had opened a separate investigation into Mossridge Solutions. Apparently, Tamra's little scheme had copied the format of a prior case in another county. They were now looking at broader HOA fraud patterns across the state and wanted to use our case in a training seminar. I gave them everything. Every email, every document, every recording, because if there's one thing I learned, it's this: bullies don't stop until someone makes them. And sometimes, all it takes is refusing to back your trailer down when they tell you to move. The community was healing. You could feel it in the way people lingered longer on their walks, kids rode their bikes without glancing nervously at the clubhouse, and neighbors who'd once only exchanged glances now swapped tools and stories. But that peace didn't mean we were letting our guard down. After the arrests, we expected the worst was behind us. But 3 weeks into the transition, while I was helping Lewis install a new swing set one that no one was going to make them tear down this time, I got a call from Carla. "There's something new," she said, voice tight. I found a backup folder I missed before. It was hidden under a junk directory labeled Q4 Archive. "I think you need to see it." I drove over immediately. Carla was waiting with her laptop open on her dining table. She pulled up a spreadsheet, dozens of rows, all with dates and addresses. Then she opened a second file, scanned forms filled out with handwritten notes. At the top of each was the header, "Lien Recommendation Pre-Processing." I leaned in. "These are from last year," Carla nodded, "but look at the names. Most of these people never got notices." They were flagged, but nothing was sent. She clicked on one name, a single mother named Rena who lived on the corner of Willowbend. Her paperwork showed a supposed violation for chronic storage of unauthorized outdoor equipment, whatever that meant. But the notes were more disturbing. Under remarks, someone had written, "Refinance pending property value high potential lien opportunity." I straightened. "That's not enforcement, that's targeting." Carla nodded grimly. They were tracking whose homes were increasing in value, especially ones with upcoming refinancing. If a lien hit during a mortgage process, the homeowner would be forced to pay it immediately to avoid delays. My stomach turned. They were weaponizing the timing. They were trying to create cash flow by manufacturing urgency. And they were targeting people less likely to fight back. I took photos of every file. That night, I called Sheriff Lance again. This wasn't just HOA overreach anymore. This was predatory financial fraud. By morning, a task force from the state attorney general's office was involved. They coordinated with the district attorney and launched a formal investigation into the HOA board's financial practices over the last 3 years, specifically looking at the lien manipulation scheme. They issued subpoenas for banking records, HOA meeting transcripts, and digital communications. The forensic team found that Tamra and her associates had attempted to use the fake compliance committee as a front to initiate liens against 12 properties, deliberately timed to interfere with refinancing or sales. 4 of those properties had been sold under pressure, their owners forced to pay overinflated fines or lose buyers. The worst part: in 2 of those cases, the homeowners had never been formally notified. They discovered the liens only when their sales fell through. The AG's office classified it as intentional fraud with the goal of financial exploitation. Charges were expanded. Tamra now faced counts of extortion and civil rights violations under state law. Her bail was revoked, and she was remanded into custody pending trial. The treasurer and Bluetooth board member both entered plea deals and agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentencing. Their testimony detailed how Tamra had instructed them to stall official notices and only file liens after confirming a pending financial transaction on the property. It was cold, calculated. And it explained why so many violations had seemed to come out of nowhere. Meanwhile, our newly elected board moved fast. We didn't just change policies, we tore down the old ones. We voted to eliminate discretionary enforcement entirely. All violations now required a recorded vote, documented photographs, and a homeowner's signature acknowledging the notice before any action could be taken. No more surprise fines. No more secret committees. No more silence. We also created a volunteer watchdog panel, 5 residents from diverse backgrounds, including a retired judge, a school counselor, and a Gulf War veteran who reviewed every enforcement action for fairness and legality. But even as we fixed policies, we had to repair trust. Rena, the woman targeted for her home's refinancing, had nearly lost her house after the fraudulent lien delayed her approval. The bank had pulled their offer, and she'd been forced to accept a higher interest rate from another lender. Her monthly payments went up by nearly $400. When she spoke at the next community meeting, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't curse or cry. She simply said, "I thought I was safe here. I thought this was a neighborhood, but I was marked like a number." We voted unanimously to return every penny collected through fraudulent means. We also launched a legal support fund for residents still affected, seeded by voluntary donations and the remainder of Tamra's seized assets. The fund helped Rena refinance again, this time at a lower rate than she'd originally had. A few months later, she bought a new minivan and took her kids to Disneyland. She sent us a postcard with a photo of them wearing mouse ears, grinning like they'd won the lottery. And in a way, they had. The trial brought media attention. Tamra sat in court with her hair tied back, no makeup, and a stare like she couldn't believe this was happening to her. The judge was a no-nonsense woman with a voice like gravel and no patience for the defense's attempts to paint Tamra as a misguided volunteer. The prosecution laid out the scheme with brutal clarity. The manufactured violations, the hidden documents, the targeted timing of liens. They showed spreadsheets, emails, even internal memos with Tamra's notes on which homes were financially ripe. When the verdict came down guilty on all counts, no one clapped. No one cheered. We just nodded to one another silently, like a weight had been lifted from the entire community at once. Tamra was sentenced to 7 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 4. The judge also ordered her to pay restitution to every affected homeowner, with the AG's office seizing her retirement accounts and trust holdings to fulfill the judgment. The treasurer and Bluetooth board member received probation, community service, and were barred from holding any HOA position again in the state. After the sentencing, the state attorney general gave a short press conference. He praised the community for standing up in the face of corruption disguised as governance, and said our case would be used in future training programs for HOA oversight reform. We didn't ask for that spotlight. But we accepted it because if our fight could stop another neighborhood from going through the same thing, it was worth it. 6 months later, Willow Creek looked different, not just in spirit but in shape. The old clubhouse was repurposed into a community space with art classes, resume workshops, and game nights. The unused towing contracts were shredded and replaced with a simple rule: if a vehicle's a genuine hazard, call the sheriff. Otherwise, talk to your neighbor. We held our first annual block party around the lake. Someone brought a band, kids danced in the grass, and Phil the retired machinist grilled the best ribs I've ever had in my life. As the sun dipped below the treetops, I rolled my jet ski down the driveway and backed it into the water. No one said a word. No one needed to. Tamra had tried to rule the neighborhood like a kingdom, using fear and fabricated authority to keep people in line. But the thing about people is, once they realize they've been manipulated, they don't just push back, they rebuild. We didn't just win. We turned the HOA into what it was always supposed to be: a community, not a control panel. A place where people look out for each other, not over their shoulders. And the jet ski, still mine. Still parked where I want.